Greater Sandton and beyond. Get ready for the Sandton Times Hour
with your host,
Alexander.
Ladies and gentlemen, everyone in between and beyond, welcome to the Sandton Times Hour. And let's do a little check-in. We haven't done this in a while. It's edition 178, week 43 of 2024. And of course, the Sandton Times Hour is always available on all leading digital audio channels wherever you are in the world. And make sure that you subscribe and get your dose of the Sandton Times Hour every single week if you don't catch it live. If you'd like to get in touch, you can do so by sending through your questions, your comments, or your feedback to email editor@sandtontimes.co.za, social media @Sandton Times, and of course the website www.sandtontimes.co.za. And a very special welcome to everyone listening for the very first time. If you've just tuned in, if you've come across the show, if this is your first exposure to the Sandton Times Hour, well, pull up a seat. Special welcome to you. We'll get some snacks and drinks in just a minute. And of course, if you're a regular, well, you've probably brought your own snacks and drinks, and you're back again for more across Johannesburg and Pretoria, Gauteng, South Africa, and everywhere else in the world, online or on air, wherever you are. I'm happy to report that all is well in Sandton land, and it's great to have you be part of the community. Vincenzo, my esteemed sound engineer behind the mixing desk again, and it's always good to have you by my side when we do all of this. In the driving seat is me, or in the cockpit, whichever you prefer. And it's been quite a week. There's a lot of interesting weeks coming up before the year draws to a close. I can't believe it's past the middle of October again. It's incredible how time just goes. But I kicked off this past week with a launch of Mercedes-Benz vans. They brought out some of their new vehicles to test drive, but in particular, this new e-Sprinter that they brought out. So an electric version of their Sprinter, which is incredible. It's quite I'd argue, a top-heavy kind of car, and I think the challenge was to try and see if you could actually tipple it, and you can't. It's got incredible acceleration, but even if you take it into tight corners and really give the steering wheel a good tug, it's incredible how the technology just works to balance out these, I suppose, delivery vehicles, vehicles that are used for all kinds of commercial use. And it's amazing how things have evolved. In a few minutes, I'll be telling you about my company field trip that I did. I spent some time exploring some of South Africa's most dynamic companies who have the most incredible corporate cultures across different industries, different sizes. It was a fascinating 3 days. And I'm going to tell you all about this in just a few minutes, but hands down, one of the best things I've done this year. So let that be a bit of a recommendation or a testimonial. Then, middle of the week, I had some time to catch up with Justice Malala and the team at the podcast party for a special discussion around the 100 days of the GNU. They had a showcase and a bit of a recording in the heart of Sandton, so I went along to that. Some very interesting people to catch up with there. Then, talk about art imitating life. I presided over a television wedding for one of South Africa's leading daily dramas, and I'll be sure to let you know when you can catch that on television and when that will be showing. But that was my boutique return to the flat screen in your living room. Then Sandton welcomed a new nightlife spot called Vogue, which is a new dining and lounge space in Sandton. Some very nice food. And then also upstairs, they've got like a lounge area with a DJ and drinks and music and all of that. And that's popped up in Benmore. And they had their launch this week. And then I wrapped up the week at the Heineken All Invitational Polo Tournament. And I think that's more than enough for a week, quite honestly. I think I couldn't pack in any more. And of course, looking ahead, though, lots lined up for this week coming up. And one of the things that stands out is that I'll be emceeing one of Africa's largest business awards in the heart of Sandton, which I'm really looking forward to. And I'll be catching up with Fifi Peters, who will be my co-host for the evening. And also, I'll be hosting a charity golf day dinner and prize giving, which should be fantastic, and hopefully will raise loads of money for that. So who are we talking to this week? Well, in a bit, I'll be reflecting on my week, visiting some of South Africa's most dynamic businesses who boast a strong company culture and how that impacts their bottom line. That's the most important thing. Happy staff, happy bottom line. But we'll talk about that shortly. Then I'll be chatting to Nelson Mandela's former private secretary about a new book that she has released. Stay listening for that. And finally, I'll be catching up with a Sandton restaurateur who has made his mark with a successful portfolio of Italian-inspired eateries. I'm going to be chatting about what it takes to make a success in that industry. All this and more in the next hour.
show some love.
Subscribe, share
Leave a review and rating for the Sandton Times Hour.
on your favorite podcast app now.
You're listening to the Sandton Times Hour.
Well, Colin J Browne, aka the culture guy and founder of Happy Sandpit, which is a consultancy focusing on building strong company cultures, which in turn drive high workplace performance and impact the bottom line, joins me in just a second. I headed out with him for a 3-day culture field trip this past week in and around Sandton to experience 6 of South Africa's leading companies that seem to be getting organizational culture very right. They've also seen this directly impact their bottom line, and these include DHL Express, Ocean Basket, King, Price Insurance, and many, many more. Colin, it's good to have you on the Sandton Times Hour.
Hello, Alex. It's nice to be here. Thank you.
Colin, as we kick things off, before we get into the field trip details, what inspired you to write this now almost 10-year-old book, How to Build a Happy Sandpit, and how did it shape the foundation for what you do now?
It's a little older than that, actually, Alex. That book published initially at the end of 2013. So I guess it's 11 years. I was splitting hairs, but it's about that. It turned out to be an accidental passion project. I had a business prior to this, and building that business, the role that I played, there were 3 of us doing that. I became fascinated with the challenge of hiring people, adding people, motivating people. I'd never given any thought at that point, and we're talking about sort of when my first watershed moment happened about 2009. I'd never given much thought to organizational culture, employee engagement, any of these sorts of things. In fact, some of these weren't even really very common buzz terms at the time. And then I hired somebody who was just the most complex, difficult person to manage. In fact, somebody who really was probably the steepest learning curve I've yet had, and one that, by the way, I failed dismally at. Having been through that experience, I began to realize there was a lot of things I didn't know. And my background is journalism, so I know how to interview, go out and find things, dig up stories, and I enjoy that. And so I thought that would be a thing that I would do. I went back to kind of my journalism roots and went out essentially just to research this idea of organizational culture and what it was and I genuinely didn't know much at the time. But what was so remarkable was that the kinds of people who threw their doors open. I mean, I found myself in Pick and Pay and Investec and Softline and all these amazing South African businesses, talking to their leaders, talking to the senior people in those organizations. Because at the time, 2012-ish, when the research was going on, this was a topic they really wanted to talk about. It wasn't something that was being broadly discussed the way it is now. So we ended up a little ahead of the curve. I ended up with a lot of information. That became How to Build a Happy Sandpit. And out of that came the business, Happy Sandpit. It evolved from the name of the book. It was kind of a logical thing to call it in the end.
And I believe it's also a term that sort of came out of an example that you used in a presentation, yes. and people sort of gravitated towards this concept of kids playing in a happy sandpit.
So this was a strange thing. So in 2010, I kind of went out on my own a little bit, and I found myself in London for a while. While I was trying to build something there, I wasn't really getting much. It was a tail end of the financial crisis that had happened in 2008 and 9. Turned out to be very bad timing. But I thought, well, let me just, rather than doing nothing, I put together this talk, and it was really just lessons that I'd learned in starting a small business. It wasn't particularly groundbreaking. I don't think I ever got paid for that talk, by the way. It was delivered free to chambers of commerce around the southeast of England. But there was one particular slide, which was just a very roughly drawn picture. And it said, employees in a company are a little bit like children in a sandpit. And that was my explanation of the idea that you have to care about the sandpit. You have to care about the people that are in it. But if you care about it and you get it right, then you can sit on the adults table and have adult conversations with the other adults, because the children in the sandpit will sort themselves out and build amazing things and want to do it again tomorrow. That was the idea behind that metaphor. But every time that slide came up, people started taking notes. And that's when the questions came. And I thought, they're interested in this. They're really interested in this. So when it came time for me to, I thought, let me just go back to South Africa. I'm halfway through a life. I'm halfway through sort of a business journey. I can make something happen faster there than I can here. The question was, what would I do? And that's when I thought, well, let me go and research this. Let me go and see what I can find out and see if there's something here that maybe we can contribute to.
What did you find were some of the key traits of the South African companies that had exceptional employee engagement?
One of the things that I always say, and it's a bit controversial, but these are the organizations that were doing the best and that had managed to do the best were somehow those that had managed to avoid, and open and close inverted commas, the bully culture of South Africa. They were started, or at least they'd begun to evolve at the hands of people and the heads of people who understood that human beings are fundamentally free agents. You can pay them to do work, but you can't force them to do great work. They'll do that when they care and when they're interested and when they're involved, when they're excited, when they believe in the project, all of those sorts of things. These are things that that's employee engagement in a nutshell, right? And it drives there's a thick black line between that and business performance. But so many business leaders in South Africa didn't get that. And a lot of what it came down to, I think, is conditioning. I talk about the bully culture, and I don't mean that leaders are bullies, but just if we go back to the whole apartheid system, and we go back to the fact that our number one sport is a full contact physical sport, and all of this kind of stuff, we've always been a bit sort of rough and tumble. Might is right. That's how we think about the world in South Africa. With that, we've managed to build some fantastic businesses, managed to build some global businesses, but the ones that were starting to really appeal to the new generation coming through were the ones who'd always kind of gone, but actually care for people is equally as important as a business driver as simply strategy and finance and clever use of numbers and all of that. And so that was one of the things that they had in common, was that they were already fundamentally inclined to think in terms of, for example, we are not a bank that employs 10,000 people. We're 10,000 people who work together to do banking. It was an inverted way of looking at the world, people first. And I think, amongst that set of companies, and they were across industries, we're probably the best in the entire world, Alex. I think we lead the world in this type of thinking in South Africa. Genuinely, I do.
When we saw some of the companies that we visited this past week, they almost make it look easy in terms of, well, we did these things, we initiated these ideas, we put a couple of programs together, and now we're top performing. But the reality of it is that there's a lot of companies that face a lot of challenges trying to build a strong organizational culture. It's not as easy, like you say, when you're dealing with a whole group of individuals, all with their own issues, their own challenges before and after work, and the only commonality they have is probably the work that they do. What do you find are some of those common challenges that sometimes get in the way of trying to get a cohesive culture going?
Just to go back a step, I mean, one of the organizations that we visited this last week on the 3-day field trip was DHL Express. And I mean, they've got this fantastic story to tell about the way they engage their employees at a level which is just breathtaking. I mean, they are incredibly good at this, incredibly committed to this. But they'll start their presentation by saying that in 2009, they didn't do any of this. And that was part of the problem. The business was losing money. Within the DHL group, DHL Express was considered the problem child. It's completely inverted now. Completely the opposite of that. The catalyst for that change was the fact that they had a CEO who came in and said, it doesn't make any sense to me that we don't focus on people, because that's obviously how this is going to turn around, right? I mean, you can focus on getting logistics right. You can focus on, better aircraft, newer trucks. You could do all sorts of things like that. But at the end of the day, if you focus on the outcomes, you just give yourself an upstream problem, which is the people. Achieving the KPIs, the standard business metrics, that's doable. That's doable to an extent with unmotivated people. People come to work and do their jobs because they must. But great companies are ones where people do more because they want to, because they bought in, because they care, and all that kind of stuff. And that was the one thing that makes a difference for an organization like that. And I think if we look at that company, the challenge they had to overcome was that not that they were bad people. In fact, most of the people are still the same people, but they didn't have a leader who truly believed that there's a thick black line between employee engagement, encouraging the kinds of discretionary behaviors that lead to greatness, and business performance. Like it's that gap that I think a lot of organizations need to still traverse. And I think the biggest challenge for them, Alex, blatantly, is that they just don't understand that it's true. But it seems like old school thinking. If I pay you, you should do your job. Why do I have to do more? And the answer is, well, because it's not the job you want them to do. It's the more than their job you want them to do. That's what great companies get right.
Well, we're going to get into the field trip in just a minute. I'm chatting to author and culture expert Colin Browne about his consultancy, Happy Sandpit, and our 3-day field trip visiting some of South Africa's shining lights when it comes to strong corporate cultures. We're going to take a quick break, and more of this conversation straight after this break. Stay right where you are.
You're listening to the Sandton Times Hour.
I'm picking up on my conversation with culture man himself and author of How to Build a Happy Sandpit, Colin Browne. And Colin, let's get into this field trip that we went on. I mean, it was quite spectacular. On the one hand, I found it fascinating how you had a group of people who were really interested to go out and experience some of South Africa's businesses that are really getting it right. But on the other hand, what really fascinated me was that there were so many South African businesses that were prepared to open up their boardrooms, open up their doors, and say, this is who we are, this is what we do, answer very frank questions. I mean, this wasn't just sort of a fluff piece where people just sat there and just told you how fantastic they are and how wonderful they are. There was a part of that. But they were also willing to field very critical, thought-provoking questions about their culture, about what they do. And it was amazing how this all worked together in this fascinating ecosystem of exchange of business leaders around a boardroom table.
Yeah, it's been one of our greatest joys, and it has been very successful, Alex. Over the course of the last 8 years, we've seen 42 companies, I think it is, that have opened their doors to us. Some of them multiple times. There are some that we go to regularly. There are some that are brand new. There's always like a new one. We had a new one this time around as well. And and for 2025, we'll be adding more and more, because actually increasingly this conversation is expanding. And it is encouraging, because, I mean, when I go back to the initial days of 2012, 13, when the book was out for the first time, How to Build a Happy Sandpit, and I thought, well, I'm an expert now, right? Turned out that took a bit more work to do than that back in the day. But more than that, it was clear that, very quickly clear that no matter how much organizations were interested in talking about organizational culture, they weren't interested in doing anything. Like, it was because this stuff is confusing and hard, and it implies change, and that's disruptive, and that's no longer the case. I mean, you can see that. And so we have visitors coming in just this year. We've had them in from Uganda, Zambia, Botswana, and Namibia regularly. They come from Cape Town, they come from Port Elizabeth, they come from KZN. We've had them from Kimberley. I mean, they're coming from all over. This conversation is getting richer and more widespread. And we're always very grateful to the organizations that open their doors to us. They've got lots and lots of busy things to do, and spending a whole morning, and you noticed it's senior executives, right? It's the top people who are giving their time and spending a morning with us, and just to help us all interpret and understand this idea of organizational culture and how they do it. And it's incredibly wonderful, and it's exhilarating every time, even to me. And I've done a lot of these now, right? I think we've done 25, and I've been on all of them.
I must say, I took a lot out of it, to the extent that I would even like to say I'd actually taken out more out of this 3-day field trip than I took out of a segment of my MBA talking about corporate culture, organizational culture, because it is just so pragmatic, and it's not a textbook. There's no lecture standing there giving you a theoretical framework or model as to what it could potentially be or what it could look like. Be interesting to hear from you what some of your standout moments or experiences have been that have left a lasting impression on you when you visited some of these businesses.
So I remember a particular time when we were sitting at Comair back in the day, actually. This is one of those moments where I thought, okay, that's what it is to people. And I had at the time the head of HR for the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. He was with us, and Eric Fenter, who was the CEO of Comair, was standing there. He always used to take us through personally, 3 hours, just talking about the organizational culture. And he turned to me, this guy, and he said, I've just realized what's going on. And I said, what's that? He says, he's the CEO of a publicly listed business, and he's standing here talking to us. And I said, but that's the point. He's not doing this because we're here. We're here because this is the kind of thing that he does. Like, this is what organizations are. The organizations that we visit, this is what they care about. This is how they are. And so one of the big takeaways has been the sheer level of high-level executive involvement in the companies that we go to see. This is why we go to see them, because that's how they think. And I didn't even draw that conclusion at first necessarily when we first started doing these things. I'm also always thrilled to see just the intentionality of so many organizations. I mean, let's not get ourselves mixed up here. Every organization has an organizational culture of sorts. It's either an intentional one because you've driven it that way, or it's whatever the employees have decided it is, or the worst performing manager or whatever has decided that it is. But every organization has a culture, and the question is, are you getting what you want out of it? And these are all organizations that have answered that question. They've been intentional about how to do that. So they've thought long and hard about the behaviors and the mindsets and the leadership training and the management training and all of that kind of stuff. So you're almost getting from all of these organizations, although they're different, DHL's 600,000 people globally, Intellect's 1,500 people locally, kind of thing. They're quite different in terms of their size. Ocean Basket's management team is very, very small. There's a small core of people who run that. But the one thing they could literally, you could put them all in a room and they'd come up with more agreements about the ways to do things, even though their specific circumstances are different, because they've all learnt many of the same lessons. And this is the critical thing, right? How to Build a Happy Sandpit, the book, and all the work we've done over the years has been very focused locally, very focused on South Africa, because this is a peculiar melting pot. We have a really specific set of circumstances in our country. Nobody's got the socioeconomic challenges that we've got and all of that kind of stuff. We've got the biggest Gini coefficient. I mean, there's lots going on here, which makes engaging employees in an organization quite challenging. And in fact, you'd almost have to argue you've got to be very audacious to even think that's possible. And yet we do. The point about that is that all of these organizations, as different as they are hiring South African employees from the South African labor force. It shows what can be done. It shows the choices you are able to make and be successful. And so it's not like we're looking at Google in Silicon Valley and going, well, that's cool for them, but we can't do that. No, we can. We can do these things. So these are always some of the things that I enjoy.
Well, Colin Browne, he is known as the culture guy. He's the founder of Happy Sandpit. And if you want to pack your rucksack, grab a notebook and be part of one of these 3-day culture field trips, or maybe you're a company in Johannesburg, Cape Town, or Durban who feel that you've got a great company culture and you've got a great story to tell and you might want to have the Happy Sandpit put you to the test. Well, I'm going to be putting up the Happy Sandpit's details up on the website. And Colin, it's been great having you on the Sandton Times Hour, and thank you for the opportunity to visit some of South Africa's great corporate cultures.
It was wonderful to have you, Alex. It was great to reconnect. We haven't seen each other for a decade or something, I don't think. I think the last time we met was at an airport in Woolies coffee counter or Tambo or something. So it was good to see you again and good to have you on board. And thank you for joining us.
You're listening to the Sandton Times Hour.
And as we get into the second half of the Sandton Times Hour, don't forget that if you caught something intriguing, interesting, something that you didn't get all the details on, well, don't forget you can go onto the show notes after the show. That's on www.sandtontimes.co.za, and you can get all the details, all the breakdowns, links, contact, things that you couldn't remember who we spoke to or what we spoke about, and there's some further reading there, and it's always really useful to go check out the notes. Also, don't forget that you can follow the Sandton Times on social media at Sandton Times on whatever your preferred platform is, and it is always good to hear from you. Well, my next guest is waiting in the wings, and I'm really looking forward to this chat. Zelda La Grange started her career in 1992 as an executive secretary in the Department of State Expenditure. And then in 1994, she joined the office of Nelson Mandela, the country's first democratically elected president. By 1997, Zelda became one of Mandela's 3 private secretaries, and after his retirement, he personally selected her to continue working for him, and together with Professor Jakes Gerwel, she helped establish the Nelson Mandela Foundation right here in Houghton. Over nearly 20 years, her role evolved from private secretary to office manager, stakeholder relationship manager, spokesperson, aide-de-camp, and personal assistant, and she remained by Nelson Mandela's side until he passed away in 2013. And in June 2014, Zelda then published her memoir, the international bestseller Good Morning, Mr. Mandela. Just on 10 years later, she has now released a new book titled What Nelson Mandela Taught Me, Timeless Lessons on Leadership and Life. And I'm thrilled to have Zelda joining me on the line right now. Zelda, it's good to have you on the Sandton Times Hour.
Hi, I'm Alexander, and thank you very much for having me, and hello to all your listeners.
Zelda, what was the thought process behind writing your book as a response to the question, have you learned nothing from Nelson Mandela, following some controversial tweets that you posted online?
Alexander, then one of the things that Madiba always said was that unless you face your problems, they will always stay with you. So I realized that this thing was really like an albatross around my neck, and I needed to deal with the fallout and the question that had been put to me during that time, what have I actually learned from Nelson Mandela? So this is really an attempt for me. It's my journey of growth. It's my own interpretation of things. And that inspired me then and led me to the second book. It's lessons that's really relatable and that people can use in everyday life. To kind of invigorate also the legacy of Nelson Mandela and see how timeless his lessons really were, and how we can still use them in navigating 2024.
Well, you were extraordinarily close to Nelson Mandela. I mean, more so than any one of us for nearly 2 decades. And what would you say were some of the profound lessons that you learned from observing his interactions with, of course, famous people, but also just ordinary people?
The thing that struck me most, and I think that's most relevant also in 2024 because of social media and smartphones, is really his ability to listen to people. And where we are in South Africa right now, with the GNU, we need to listen to one another and listen with the intention of really understanding one another rather than responding. That was one of the great characteristics of Nelson Mandela's leadership, is that he was able to listen to so many divergent voices. And it's something that, that he encouraged all the time, to be surrounded by people with different opinions, because that's how you get to the best solutions. And so for me, that is the one thing I think of most often now, especially where we are as a country in this year after the elections.
Was writing this book for you also a chance to sort of process some of the things that you've had to go through, and I mean that you also outline in the book? I mean, some of the stuff gave me a bit of anxiety, I must be honest. But it really is a bit of a therapeutic exercise, because I think, if we just mention what you're just saying about Nelson Mandela now as well and his time, we didn't have social media. We didn't have these platforms where you could instantly respond or just share your ideas with a few million people. I mean, if you wanted to say something, you had to put pen to paper or get a typewriter, or, if you had a computer and a printer, and you had to really think about it. And then it would take a week or two for that message to land somewhere. Now it's just very instantaneous.
Yes, and I think that creates a lot of misunderstanding, and it removes no nuance. And we make up our minds about people, based on only what we see or read of them on social media or on the internet. And that is not who Nelson Mandela was. He understood and he appreciated complexity of the human being, and that we all had vices and virtues. And, we need to connect again as human beings and connect to that, the humanity between us as South Africans. So it was a very difficult process for me to write this book, because also, as you say, I had to deal with a lot of my own demons, but, and my blind spots, and really look at things from all angles. But I'm happy that, that process has provided some growth for me as well.
You have this recurring theme, as you've touched on, which is to truly listen, something that Mandela did very well, and not just to respond. Do you have any particular moments where you saw this quality in action when you spent time with him?
One of my favorite memories, Alexander, of Madiba is, how he would sit and listen to you whenever you made a submission or you tried to explain something to him, or, you engage with him. People brought all kinds of problems to him. And then he would just sit attentively with his hand on his chin and listen attentively throughout your submission. And at the end, he would just simply say something like, very well, yes, I see. And that meant that he heard you and he observed completely in that moment, but it didn't mean that he necessarily agreed with you at that point. So taking in all the information, and that is what he learned as a small boy. His first childhood memory was about learning the art to listen. So it's something that we definitely can all start practicing a little better, is to listen to one another again and connect as people.
I find it interesting what you say there. He would acknowledge that what you said, but wouldn't necessarily agree with it. Was he also the type of man who would then also afford himself the, I don't want to call it luxury, but the opportunity to then also take time to respond and maybe take a day or two or a week or a month or however long and say, I'm going to apply my mind and then I'm going to give you a response, as opposed to give you an immediate response and say, I don't agree, or doesn't make any sense, or whatever the response was?
Absolutely. He often said to me, he would say, I miss prison. And then I would say, no, you can't say that. That's not something, you should ever say. And he would jokingly respond and say, no, I miss time to think. Because he had such a busy life after his release, he hardly had time to think. But it took 2 hours in the afternoon for him to rest. And those 2 hours he used to really contemplate issues. So he did take the time. And he would really look at an issue from all sides and make sure, double sure at the end, that when he responds, that it was the right thing to say. So although that also was a very natural thing of him, he had great intuition on issues as well. It's something that I think that we, because of the fast-paced world that we live in, we don't take time really enough to contemplate our issues. And that brings a whole lot of complications to all of us.
Well, here's another slice of that legacy, What Nelson Mandela Taught Me, timeless lessons on leadership and life. It's available online and also in all good bookstores. And go grab a copy and read it for yourself, because I think that's always the best way to really get the full picture, as we've discussed. And Zelda La Grange, the author of this book, but also Nelson Mandela's assistant for many years, well on 2 decades. It's been a great pleasure having you on the Sandton Times Hour.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Alexander. Yes, the book is full of stories of Madiba and wonderful tales. So I hope the readers enjoy it. Thank you very much for the time.
Follow the Sandton Times on social media.
@Sandton Times.
Well, Alessandro Khojane, known as Alex or the Sutu Italian, is a visionary restaurateur, and he's also the owner of several renowned restaurants in and around Sandton. You might know some of them. You might know Gemelli. You might know the PANTRY by Gemelli. There's also Therapy and Manaka Coffee and many, many more. He was born in Bloemfontein, but then he moved to Italy as an infant, where his love for food and hospitality blossomed. And he joins me on the line right now. And Alessandro, it's good to have you on the Sandton Times Hour.
How's it, Alex? How you doing, bro?
Listen, it is absolutely fantastic, and it's great to have you here. And I'm going to ask you to pick up on this conversation and the story for me. As you moved to Italy as an infant, how did that sort of develop your current passion for food, and how did that evolve your career?
Okay, so I was raised in Italy because my dad was a diplomat for Lesotho for a few years. And I got back when I was 12 years old. So, like, I'm blessed enough that I could speak Italian. But my real passion for food started when I was in Durban, funny enough.
Okay.
Because I dropped out of high school. I dropped out of varsity. My first year in varsity, I didn't go to varsity. I partied the whole year in Durban. You know how Durban is. It was sunny and fun. I started waitering in my first year, and I fell in love with waitering. I worked for a guy by the name of Marco Conti, and I worked for his mom, Luciana, in Durban. And they're the guys that, like, brought the fire of loving food. But I genuinely enjoy human beings. I think it was an advantage. It just so happens I work for an Italian restaurant, and as an advantage that I was raised in Italy.
Well, that seems to be part of the recipe for success for restaurateurs, is that it is a love for people brought together by food.
Correct, 100%. You cannot own a restaurant and not like people. It's very hard. Or be likable. It's very hard to be a successful restaurateur and not be likable.
You kicked open Gemelli's in 2015, and it has become an incredibly successful restaurant. You've also expanded on that with the Pantry by Gemelli. What do you think made this concept such a hit? What made people want to come back over and over again?
I think for Gemelli was just good food, right? Was just good food, consistently good food. And then what happens, Pantry developed because personally, I'm the kind of guy that has to have breakfast as my first meal, whether it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I don't care what time I wake up, but breakfast is the dish I must start my day with. And I got tired of always going to the same restaurant. I'm not going to say its name because we're friends, but I'm not going to give them airtime. And they serve breakfast the whole day. I'm like, what? I want to have breakfast the whole day, so I'm going to build a restaurant that serves breakfast the whole day. And then what happened also with the growth of Gemelli is that my older clientele, especially the ladies, wanted a place where they could have brunch in a calm environment, because Gemelli became a bit of an animal. And so I literally build brands around what customers need. I build around the customer's need. I watch what my customers do. I watch what they need, and I try to build a brand around them. And 8 out of 10 times, what I need, you need. So I try to build a brand around myself.
The food itself is the one element to, I think, the success of a restaurant. But I think there's also a part that a lot of people don't see or don't want to see and don't realize. And that is the operational part of a restaurant. And what do you feel that, like, your experiences with Marco down in Durban, how did that shape your approach to running a restaurant?
To be honest, operations... I don't enjoy that part. The older I get, the less I enjoy operations of a restaurant. I think what people don't understand is to get that plate out there every day, you need human beings to do that. And operations of a restaurant, there's building a great brand, but then there's managing people and managing people's consistency and keeping them happy and making sure they're in the right frame of mind to make good food. Because if they're not happy, the food is not going to be happy, because these people make their food with emotions daily. I always say, like, if you're having a bad day, please don't come to work, bro, because I don't want my customers to taste that. Like, I don't want my customers to taste your bad day.
Yeah.
So the hardest thing about operating a restaurant is operating the human beings that make the restaurant work. There's a business element of restaurateuring, which I'm blessed enough to have 2 older brothers of mine that take care of it. Not blood brothers, but like they're brothers in business and in war. But the real honest truth is that I believe the success of running a great restaurant is being able to manage people.
And you're also now translating this into assistance for aspiring restaurateurs. I believe you do quite a bit of consulting as well, because it is a very competitive industry, and there's a lot of people out there that need either a reality check or just a clear guideline as to how do I make this restaurant work.
100%. I always, we do have a great business that helps people start a restaurant. We will help you design your kitchen. We'll build your kitchen. I work with a group of guys that know what they're doing. I work with Edward, who knows his job as far as building kitchen is concerned. So I'm blessed enough to have a group of people around me that make me look good. Where I step in is every time you feel like, oh, Alex, what do I need to open a restaurant? I'm like, firstly, you need a bottomless pit of money that you're going to throw it at it, because restaurants are a lot of money. They cost money, right? And then secondly, you need to have patience and love human beings, right? And then I'll teach them that. And then people are like, okay, I'm going to do it. I'll always advise people not to open a restaurant. But if you want to do it, let me help you do it. So I'm going to give you an operations team. I'm going to give you a menu. I'm going to give you food. I'm going to help you build this. I'm going to help you with the landlord. We have a full consultancy business that literally runs like a head office for a few different businesses.
What do you feel are the biggest obstacles when it comes to running a successful business operation? I mean, you've mentioned the people element. You've mentioned you need a lot of money for it. You need to have a bit of an idea of what you're doing. But is there anything else that really ends up being sort of like the Achilles heel when it comes to running a restaurant?
Time. The Achilles heel about running a restaurant is time. You have to spend time in your shop. You have to. You don't have a choice. You have to spend the first 2 years of your business 12, 14 hours every day in your store. And I don't think people get that till it happens. And then it happens and they're like, nah, this is not for me. Restaurateuring is either it's in you or it's not. Like, it's hard. It's a hard business. And it takes a lot of time, but I love it. It's either you're built for it or you're not. Some people come into it and they make a success of it. I agree, and I'm proud of them. But it's because they spend time in their stores. You have to spend time in your stores. A few restaurateurs running great businesses who come from corporate and came into the restaurant game and are doing a great job at it, actually. I know 1 or 2, and their businesses are flying because they have a partner that's always been in the restaurant game, right? I think what people don't understand about restaurants is time. That's the Achilles heel, is time.
Yeah.
That's it.
You've set up a really great portfolio of brands. I mean, a lot of people might say, well, you know what, like, what else do you really still need to do? But have you got any big plans? What's in the pipeline for you in terms of new ventures, maybe some exciting ideas going into 2025?
As I said, I always build brands around what my customers need or what I need. So I'm a dad of a 2-year-old baby girl. Think about it like that. There's something in those pipelines coming along. I'm going to cater to her on a different level. And I honestly believe the reason why there's a service for it. There's a service for people with kids. There's a service for kids with parents. I don't think there's a service for parents with kids.
Okay.
So that's what I'm going to cater to, parents with kids.
You heard about it here first. Alessandro Khojane, the man behind such iconic brands in Sandton like Gemelli and the Pantry by Gemelli, and of course his various other businesses that we're not going to list all of them now. But Alessandro, it's been such a pleasure having you on the Sandton Times Hour, and thanks for making time to chat.
It's been awesome chatting to you, Alex. Thank you, brother.
Yeah, and with that, it's all we have time for this week on the Sandton Times Hour. As always, available on all good podcast platforms wherever you are in the world: Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Podcast Party, AfriPods, and so many more. Of course, when you get in touch, email editor@sandtontimes.co.za, connect on social media @Sandton Times, and hop onto the website www.sandtontimes.co.za, and feel free to send through your questions, your comments, your feedback, your input, your thoughts. You can add to that list. So many things. Just do it. Thank you to all our guests who made time to be on the show this week, and of course also the team behind the scenes that make it all happen. Make this sound good. Make it sure it gets wherever it needs to get to. Thank you for listening, and let's do it all again next week.
That's it for this week. Thanks for listening to the Sandton Times Hour. And if you enjoyed it, be sure to share it.